topic is Microsoft Teams security and compliance best practices. And before we start with the session as it is, some organizational stuff. I'm really sure you already saw the slides over the day, but again, please join us and help the Chicago Public School. And on the other side, we definitely have to say thanks to our sponsors, even in times like this, where we can have on-site events. So massive thanks to all the sponsors. And with this, let's start with the session. So first of all, I'll give you a little bit an idea about this session. The session will contain an overall Microsoft Teams security story. So it's not only about what can be configured in a Teams client or in the Teams admin center. It's really from a common perspective. You're using Teams and you want to use it secure. And this session will give you an overview about what you can do with all the other Microsoft 365 tools like Azure Active Directory, Conditional Access, and so on, to secure this environment or to tweak it to your compliance needs. I have a couple of demos, and demos are also focusing to really real-world scenarios we know from projects we already did with Microsoft Teams. So starting this, I'm coming from the SharePoint universe. I started my professional career as a SharePoint consultant, and as a SharePoint guy, I knew the question when to use what. So remember a couple of years ago when Microsoft starts to have task lists in SharePoint, I know discussions with my clients, should we use Microsoft SharePoint task lists or should we stay with tasks in Outlook? And so this is really the same discussion that we have actually with Teams, with a lot of Teams features, but also for, focusing to Teams security and compliance. Should we do it with Team settings? Should we use stuff like information protection, labeling, and so on, or even here in Europe, the discussion, should we block accessing Teams for files, or should we just set up internal rules that Teams is only allowed for chat and video conferencing, but not for storing and processing content, and so on. And at the end of the day, this isn't a technical question. So what I just say to my customers is just start with what do you want to achieve? What the business needs? And based on this, then we can decide which technical features we use to reach these goals. And this is what this session is focusing to. And because of this, it's really necessary to make it clear what do you want to achieve with the solution you are planning, or with all the regulations or compliance rules that you have to fulfill. It definitely, one of the first steps is to make you clear and to make it clear to your customers or even to your business people. There are two different, mainly completely different scenarios. The first is protecting the content that is stored in Teams, starting with the Teams chat, but also the documents and all the other stuff that you just process and store in Teams. And the other security and compliance perspective is securing the access to Teams. So questions about, can I use my private device? Or what about unmanaged device, maybe partners or customers using to access your Teams environment, and discussions around this. And with this in mind, let's start with a level 100 basic settings. So level 100 Teams settings is what you can do in the Teams client, what every Teams owner can configure on its own decision. There is no central position, even not in the Teams admin center or wherever, to configure these settings. But to be true, these are only high-level settings. You know this from Microsoft Teams clients, navigating to the settings tab, and then we can configure stuff like this. And even stuff which is shown here in the list is focusing to security and also to compliance facts. And this is the first thing we can do, or you need to introduce your end users, your power users, key user concept, whatever do you use to make this available or well known by your Teams users. Let's talk about level 200 Teams Admin Center. As you know, Teams get its own admin center in Microsoft 365. And also there is a basic difference between what we can do about the capabilities and the strategy yet to use to configure and set up your team's environment. So that means we have compliance and governance topics, and of course we have really security, IT security topics in the Teams Admin Center. This is just a short overview about what can be configured, and as you can see, we have the chance to use policies. It's just a little bit like a policy hell. It's just associating to what you know from the developer perspective, the DLL hell. So this is a policy hell that we actually have in the Teams Admin Center. But anyway, it's like it is. And we can use these different policies to tweak Teams as in Teams, meetings in Teams, app permissions, and so on to what you need. And on the other side, on the right side here on the slide, you can see security settings, which are normal or quiet settings. So, for example, are third-party or external apps allowed in Teams, yes or no? What about external access, which means interaction with Skype or Skype for Business? Or what about guest access in Teams? This can be configured from a global perspective. So if you say in the Teams Admin Center, no, guests are not allowed, then there is no chance to have any guest in any of your teams. If you say, okay, in some teams we need some guests, then you need to opt in this setting in the Teams Admin Center and, for example, use conditional access or information protection to tweak it to different teams at the end. Also, a configuration that is focusing to the complete environment is team settings about other file sharing solutions. So per default, we have SharePoint, of course, and we can also use the apps listed here. And this is also configured from a global perspective. Which means, again, a little bit as a wrap up here in the slide deck, we have tenant-wide settings and we have policy-based settings that can be rolled out to different groups, to different users in your environment. To give you a concrete example how this can work is what I show you here on the next slide. I have a first-line worker policy, and this policy, as you can see, is just limiting what a first-line worker can do. There is no chance to upload custom apps, and there are no pre-installed apps because of, in this scenario, first-line workers should natively use the Teams app as it is. And on the other side, I have a global policy for, let's say, all the other users or power users. And you can see this global policy allows uploading and pinning apps. And there's also the pre-installed Adobe Creative Cloud app in the Teams environment for that. And of course, let's have a look at a global setting example. This is which other file storing or file sharing features should be available in the Teams environment. And as you can see here, there is no chance to roll this out with different policies to different users. If you say Dropbox is allowed, yes or no, then it's allowed for every team and every user in Teams. Let's switch over to the first demo to show you how this looks like in the Teams Admin Center. I'll just show you my browser, and then we can have a look at this in detail. So I'm here in the Teams Admin Center, and as you know, the Teams Admin Center got a little bit reorganized at the end of last year, and the setup policy for the Teams apps is just found here. And as you can see, and as you saw on the slides, I have a global org-wide policy and I have a first-line worker policy. And clicking on the first-line worker policy, you can see the limitations: no upload of custom apps, no apps can be pinned, and there are no pre-installed apps. And on the other side, there is just another policy. It's a global policy. And this policy allows these configurations. Okay, as you can see, I have the chance to install an app. The Adobe app, as you saw on the screenshot, isn't actually here in the policy respected. And also you can pin the app to the left side of the Teams client. This is how it works. And at the end, the next step is to say, okay, which of these policies is rolled out to which group of users in your environment. And the other setting that you saw on the slide deck is just from the team settings here on the navigation. And as you can see, all these settings are focusing to the complete Teams environment. They are not scoped or limited to different groups or users. And within this, we can see the file settings, what should be allowed on other file storage locations. Okay, going back to the slide deck. Let's talk about guests in Teams. This is just a combination between settings in the Teams Admin Center and in the Azure Active Directory. And Azure Active Directory is a master for external guests in your Microsoft 365 environment. So what you do in Azure Active Directory is not only focusing to Teams, but also to OneDrive, SharePoint, and so on and so on. OneDrive, Power BI, for example, also. But you have the chance to also configure this in the Teams Admin Center. From the hierarchy that Azure Active Directory is the master, it means that you have to make it clear with your Azure Active Directory administrators, is it allowed, yes or no? Because if Azure Active Directory administrator says no, no guests are allowed, or for example, only he is able to invite external guests, then you can configure in the Teams Admin Center whatever you want, because of Azure Active Directory wins. This is a priority feature. Which means we have the settings in the Teams Admin Center about externals are allowed, yes or no, which is here in the Guest Access tab. And on the other side, we have the configuration in Azure Active Directory about external collaboration settings. Let's also have a look at this in the demo. So first of all, let's go to Azure Active Directory. And in my Azure Active Directory here, you can see I have the settings, and the settings we need for this are under user settings here. And then we have the manage external collaboration. And here you can see the switches or the configuration for are guests allowed and who should be able to invite guests. And this configuration wins, and this configuration is valid for, as I said, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, of course, Power BI, and all other stuff that you can share with externals and which and need authentication for this external person. And on the other side, we have the settings here in the Teams Admin Center. And they are located or reorganized under the new Users tab. And in the Users tab, as you can see on the left side, we have the external access. And here is the guest access. And here we have allowed guest access in Teams, yes or no. And if you say here on, but in Azure Active Directory, no, then Azure Active Directory wins. Okay. Going back to the slides. Let's talk about some advanced settings we can use with other features we have in Microsoft 365. So this is about the capabilities with sensitivity labels on Teams, Azure Active Directory conditional access and Teams, and of course, application policies in Endpoint Manager. Starting with sensitivity labels, we have the chance to also configure in the sites and group settings what should happen or what should be allowed or not be allowed when this label is assigned to a Microsoft team. So from a technical perspective, in the backend, it is assigned to the Microsoft 365 group, which is just the complete wrap up for the team. And for this group, as you can see here, site and group settings, it enforces who can access a Microsoft team, or which with device you are allowed to access the team. Which means if you configure the label, for example, like this, allowed limited web-only access, and then in the next step, you assign this label to a team, that means that if this is an unmanaged device, you have only the chance to using Teams with a browser, but not with the Teams client. We will have some demos about this after the next slides. Really necessary to know is that assigning a label to a team didn't enforce encryption or something like this. So what you know normally, you can see it here on the left side in the encryption tab. This is focusing to content, which means when you assign this label to a Word, PowerPoint, PDF, whatever document, then you can configure should it be encrypted and who should have access after it is encrypted. But assigning a label to a site or to a group didn't bring encryption for this team. And this is really necessary to know. If you have the scenario that you need encryption for all the content that is stored in a team, so scenarios like you have a team where your managers are working in and there are really sensitive informations about whatever projects, internal projects or business data, and you say, okay, every document that is stored in this team or posted in the chat in this team needs automatically be encrypted with a label which says management only or whatever. This can be also done, but this is done by using the auto-labeling functionality. So auto-labeling is also a part of information protection in Microsoft 365, as you can see here in this screenshot. And using this, you can configure, okay, all content which is just located in a specific OneDrive or on a specific SharePoint site should automatically get a label. I've put you a link here in the slides which explaining this in detail because there are some details you definitely need to know. So for example, not every content type can be automatically labeled. So if it is just not a supported content type, you need to label it manually with the information protection client. With the client, you can label everything. But the auto-labeling feature is just limited to a list of supported content types. Okay, let's have some more slides and then we switch over to the next demo. Another feature we can use is conditional access. So Azure Active Directory conditional access gives us the capability to configure policies, which says, for example, okay, if you are a guest user, you are only allowed to use the browser to access Teams. This can make sense in the context of that using the browser means that there is no data locally stored or less data locally stored, stuff like this. Or for example, you're just focusing to specific versions of iOS, Android that needs to be used to access Teams environment and so on and so on. This can also all be enforced using conditional access. We have some further demos about this in the rest of the session. So you can see here in the screenshot, we can configure scenarios like, for example, the device needs to be Azure Active Directory hybrid joined or marked as compliant. Marked as compliant can be used to enforce a minimum version of iOS, Android, or Windows, or a specific patch level of Windows environment, and so on and so on. This brings me to application protection based on what we can do with Endpoint Manager. You can see here in the screenshot, there is just a policy configured for unmanaged Android device focusing to Microsoft Teams. And in this policy, for example, I can say backup of org data in the Android backup is not allowed. So this is one of the typical scenarios. Or you enforce that there needs to be a PIN for accessing the Teams app on, let's say, iOS or Android device, which is unmanaged. So the scenario is, if you just invite an external partner or external guest, you normally don't have the chance to enforce something on the devices they use, because for externals, normally you are not the instance who is managing the device. But with this capability, focusing also to unmanaged devices, as you can see here, you can enforce restrictions when this guest user is using an app, or the Teams app, to access your environment. If this is just bound or enforced with the context of the login, if this user just logs out to your environment and logs into another one, then the policy isn't active. It's only active when this user is using the app to access your environment. I will show you this in a couple of demos. So first of all, start with information protection. Okay, so information protection is just located in the Microsoft Compliance Center. And yep, here we are in the Compliance Center. You can see I have a bunch of labels here pre-configured in my environment. And creating a new label gives me the chance, not only these required fields, so. And now I can say scope. Files and emails means I use the label only to protect a file or email, or groups and sites gives me the chance to also assign a label to a Microsoft team, or in the backend to a Microsoft 365 group. And with these capabilities, I can use the settings that are available here. So I can just activate these settings, and then I have the chance to say, okay, are externals allowed if this label is assigned to a Teams, yes, or to a team, yes or no? What is the default sharing experience, or other stuff like, for example, redirected to a Azure Active Directory conditional access policy. That means from an end user perspective, I go to my Teams client and I say, okay, I create a new team. I create a team from the scratch, and as you can see here, I have my sensitivity labels available. And if I have a label which is saying web only access allowed, and using this means that accessing this team is only feasible using a browser. You cannot use a Teams app to access this team in this demo. I'm just actually focusing here. So this is one of the scenarios you can do. Another thing that is available here is, I just cancel this, the auto labeling capability you saw on the slides. If you say, okay, every content in a specific team, which means every content in a specific SharePoint site, because SharePoint is the backend system for the team's content. So every content in a specific team should automatically get a label. Then we can use the auto labeling capability to enforce this. Of course, there are also some other ways using, for example, Defender for Cloud Apps to assigning automatically labels. But from the information protection features that the auto labeling capability here is what you need. And creating an auto labeling policy, one of the first questions after we have the chance to decide if we want to use a template, yes or no, is, as you can see here on the left side, choosing the location. And then you need the link to the SharePoint site, which is associated to your team. Show you this. Yep. So can you see here, I say SharePoint and then choose the site. This is how it works. Okay. Then the next thing I want to show you is the app protection policy in Endpoint Manager. I've already opened my Endpoint Manager here, and as you can see here on the left side using the App tab, there are the app protection policies. And when I create a new policy, I have to decide, okay, for which OS should it be enforced? I use Android. And in the Android tab, I have the channel. Okay, I have to give it a name. And then the next thing I can say, okay, should it be for all devices or no, for example, only for unmanaged devices or whatever your scenario is about. And then the next thing is that you have to say, okay, for which app should it be used? And then we can use the Teams app. And then the next tab, we have all the detailed settings that you saw on the screenshot. So backup org data, for example, this is a typical setting I know from projects. Also, this send org data to other apps, which means the capability to copy something out of a Teams chat and forward it using WhatsApp or Signal or whatever app. You can just restrict this using app protection policies. Okay, with this, I switch over to the slides again.
Nick, while you're switching over to the slides, there is one question in the chat window, like with Azure conditional access, if the setting limit the guest to only web app only, does that prevent from working files in the Microsoft Teams app?
Let me see. I'm just switching back to the demo environment, and we can answer the question by looking in the conditional access policy.
Sure.
Okay. So going to conditional access. You see the capabilities here we have in conditional access, and then you can say in the topic cloud apps or the conditions topic, you can configure the client apps, and here we can say, okay, only browser is allowed or browser and mobile apps are allowed. Okay. So also a scenario we had in the last month because of all the COVID limitations is about how can we limit the access to Microsoft Teams because of we just want to start using Microsoft Teams only for chat and video conferencing capabilities. So we have a couple of customers, they just running in this situation because of their on-prem video conferencing environment like WebEx or whatever wasn't planned for using for hosting 80% of all employees. But then all the employees needs to go to the home office, and the on-prem environment was completely overloaded. And they say, okay, we can use Teams, but we only want it for, let's say, video conferencing and chat, and not for collaboration. And this is a little bit about this. There are, of course, also other scenarios. We have some Swiss banks as customer, and they have really, really restricted governance policies. They need to government policies they need to respect in the context of, yes, you can use Teams for chatting, video conferencing, but it's not allowed to store specific data in the cloud because of some whatever laws and internal stuff. So different reasons why you maybe need to limit access to Teams or tweak it to what is allowed in your specific industry. And this can be done also on separate or different ways or using different capabilities in combination. So for example, here, the limit access to Teams or to SharePoint can be done using the settings in the SharePoint Admin Center. So we can configure here under the Access Control tab in the SharePoint Admin Center that, for example, the web-only access is allowed on an unmanaged device. And that automatically creates us a conditional access policy who's enforcing this setting. Which means if you're doing this, you say, okay, only web access is allowed on an unmanaged device. If a user on an unmanaged device going to Teams and going to Teams in the Files section, he opens the context menu, and as you can see here, there is no download available. And this is because of this policy, because the web-only policy in the SharePoint Admin Center limits that the content can only be edited or used or opened in the web browser, but cannot be downloaded. Another example is, what if you're switching the setting not only to limit, but to block access from an unmanaged device? So to this setting. And it results in Teams, that Teams is available. You can use the Teams chat, no problem. You can do video conferencing, whatever you want to do, no limitations. But if you navigate to the Files tab, as you can see here, you get a message that files are not available. And if you just say, okay, I open it in SharePoint, you get an access denied posting here in the web browser. So this is enforced by the settings in the SharePoint Admin Center, but it also have an impact in the usage of Teams. Can be useful if you have a scenario just enforcing this. Let's go to some detailed and advanced settings we can use in the combination with Microsoft Teams and other features that we have in Microsoft 365 ecosystem available. And the scenario I show you here is using, the name before Ignite last year was Cloud App Security, and now the new name is Defender for Cloud Apps. So the every year renaming ping pong that Microsoft did. But anyway, this is a really powerful feature, and then we can use it also for tweaking Teams or securing Teams to your needs. So the normal process is someone is accessing Teams, even your own full-time employees or external guest, means that this user is authenticated by Azure Active Directory, and then the Teams app as an enterprise app in Azure Active Directory is used. If you're just using Defender for Cloud Apps in this scenario, the Defender for Cloud Apps is just doing what a classic proxy is doing, which means the user is authenticated by Azure Active Directory, but then the access to Microsoft Teams is redirected using a conditional access policy to Defender for Cloud Apps. And this policies you configure in Defender for Cloud Apps are then enforced by accessing in this process by accessing Microsoft Teams. I will show you how this looks like from an end user perspective, and then we have some demos about how you can configure and set it up in the backend system. I'm sharing you my screen with another browser session where I'm logged in with a demo user. This one. So as you can see here, I'm logged in with my demo user, Oliver Hardy. And with this user, I'm just navigating to Microsoft Teams. And as you can see, I get a pop-up purely because of I'm just located in Germany. This is now the message in German, but it says, okay, accessing Microsoft Teams is monitored by Cloud App Security. So the user is informed that Cloud App Security is just monitoring what he's doing. Okay, say, okay, yes, thanks, I get it, and click next. And from the technical perspective, this is not only like a proxy, it is a proxy architecture. You can see this by having a look at the link. So you can see it's teams.microsoft.com.mcas.ms, which means .Microsoft Cloud App Security.ms. Okay. From a technical perspective, yes, now it's clear. From an end user perspective, it's a normal Microsoft Teams session. It's Teams like we all know it. And as you can see, I'm navigating here to this team. And in this team, I have my chat. And in this team, I also have files. And let's see what happens if I navigate to files and try to download a file. You can see here 2 Word documents. I'm just selecting this document and I say download. And what happens now is that the user gets a pop-up which says download isn't allowed. You are blocked. There is no chance for you to download it. As you can see here, there is just a pop-up that says something is downloaded. And clicking on this opens a text document. This is what is downloaded, and the text document only says download is blocked. I'm just showing you my complete desktop to show you this because of it's opened in another window. So here you can see when I click on file, open the file, this is the text document that is downloaded. This is the scenario from the end user perspective. Now let's switch over to the admin perspective and see how this is set up. It all starts from a conditional access policy. And as you can see here, I have the MCAS, Microsoft Cloud App Security demo. And this policy is from the configuration limited to Mr. Oliver Hardy here in my demo environment. It includes not only Teams, but all the Teams app and also a couple of other apps. And in the session topic here, I've configured that conditional access app control should be enforced. And as you can see, when I'm just selecting this, I get the chance to say configure custom policy, and clicking on this automatically redirects me to Cloud App Security or Defender for Cloud Apps, which is the new name. Okay, here in Defender for Cloud Apps, I have the so-called conditional access app controlled apps, which means my Teams app needs to be configured here to make this policy work. This is already done here. And with this setup, I have the chance to using the control capabilities here to navigate to policies. And let's see, I have a policy for Teams demo for Oliver Hardy. And this policy is just doing what you saw in the end user demo, which means I have here again the chance to tweak it to specific scenarios. So Office 365 services, user must be Oliver Hardy, and the device that is used is not equal to Intune compliant, which means it's an unmanaged device. And then in the settings we have here, I have the chance to say, okay, for example, block. This is what I did for the demo. And this is the result you saw. Whereas you can see here, I have also the chance to do it a little bit more different. I can say, okay, you can download the document, but when you download the document, I automatically assign information protection label. This is just another scenario that can be done with this really advanced capability. So with using all these settings we have here, as you can see, this is actually in preview, but we can redirect it again to another conditional access policy, for example, gives us a chance to really set up detailed scenarios using all the features we have available in Microsoft 365. I'm switching back to the slides, where I have some additional technical details about this setup. So, as I showed you in the demo, the app that should be used needs to be registered under conditional access app controlled apps in Defender for Cloud Apps. And if we have this, we can use the policy settings or the policy details we have in Cloud App Security available to configure what your business enforces or what your IT security officer wants to enforce in your environment. All the steps are detailed, explained in a blog post I did about this, and I've put you the link for this here in the slides. And then we saw this result from the end user perspective. The first thing is that the end user is informed that his access is monitored. And then the next one, if he clicks on download, you get the information that his download is blocked. With this, let's talk about the last topic I want to show you, the capabilities to let Microsoft Teams interact with Azure Sentinel. There are a couple of ways to do this, 2 ways to do this to be true. So the first one is using the Office 365 connector. And within the Office 365 connector, we have also the Teams feature included, as you can see here in this screenshot. And that means that all the audit logs from Office 365 are just switched over to Azure Sentinel, to Microsoft Sentinel, and we can use Sentinel to monitor what's going on in Teams. Another capability we have is the so-called Zero Trust workbook, or the Microsoft Sentinel for Teams, which is actually in preview, which means it's just a pre-configured playbook, which is provided by Microsoft, and it is focusing directly to Teams. I'll switch over to the demo and will also show you also these. So back in the demo environment, I'm here in my Microsoft Sentinel instance, and as you can see here, my workbooks are already configured Office 365, which is a free connector that is provided by Microsoft. And then we can say view saved workbook. Doing this, I get the details about the audit logs that are just provided by Office 365. As you can see, there is no data shown because I have to configure the filters here. I say, so for example, I want all the signals that you have from Microsoft Teams, and you can also tweak it to specific users, or let's say for all users. And then we get the reports. Because of this is my demo tenant, the reports are not that interesting. As you can see, there is not so much interaction in my demo environment, but of course, in a productive environment, this can be really, really interesting to see all the details about user activity, or even to find out activities that you don't want to have that they are happening. So this is the first example about this. Another example that we have in the slide deck is using the so-called Content Hub. And in the Content Hub, as you can see, there is a connector for Microsoft Teams. And with this capability, I just click on install so that you can see the next steps. It gives us the capability to let Microsoft Sentinel just monitor really in detail what is going on in your Teams environment. With this, let's switch over to the last slides I've prepared. So let's do a wrap up or a call to action. What does it mean? When we are talking about how to secure Teams or how to set up Teams in a compliant way, there are some simple steps I can recommend. So the first is do evaluation about the stuff that you need. There are a couple of different assessments. Maybe you also have information about the accelerator workshops that Microsoft is just offering. That can be used to just create a report about what is needed from a security and compliance perspective. What is your data privacy officer just want to have that is set up in Teams, and so on and so on. What are the concerns of your management, etc., etc. So, for example, some stuff that we know from mostly all of our projects is about guests allowed, yes, no. Who should be able to invite guests? What about external storage? What about third-party apps? What about data loss prevention in Teams? Sensitivity labels, even, for example, to protect content in specific teams, or maybe even to enforce if externals are allowed in specific teams, yes or no. And all these stuff I showed you in the demo. We have the chance to configure block downloads on unmanaged devices, as we saw in the demo, or using app enforcement restrictions, although this is really popular, block access to Teams for jailbroken devices. And all these can be set up with the features I showed you in the session. But before you start, it's necessary to get an idea what is your business, what is your management enforcing or needing for this environment. And based on this basic information, you can just set up a security blueprint, which shows what you want to archive and what the business needs. Then just do a testing, do an evaluation with some representative test persons. Maybe you need to evaluate or tweak your settings and then do your rollout. Simple as it is, but I think the most effort needs to be invested in step 1 or 2, going through all these steps and scenarios to give an idea what needs to be set up from a technical perspective. The technical setup is not a big thing. The most work needs to be spent in finding out what needs to be set up and what needs to be configured that the business can still work with Teams. And with this, I'm done with my session. I say thank you very much. Are there any further questions? You can also opt in your microphone and we can just have the conversation. Just give me the chance to show you the last 2 slides. It's again also here about the raffle and giveaways. You can see here the link, and yes, please participate and maybe win one of the raffles and giveaways. And of course, please help us to optimize conferences like this by voting the session and give us feedback. And with this, I'm open for Q&A.
Thank you, Nick. Team, do we have any questions?
Okay, if you have any questions afterwards, no problem. Just drop me a mail, just add me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, and ask me. No problem if you just have some further questions, let's say this afternoon or tomorrow. Now clapping hands, thank you very much. Okay, with this, I wish you definitely interesting rest of the conference and say thank you for just joining my session here. And yeah, goodbye.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for the great session.
Welcome.